Hey guys, it's the Stick Figure Historian. Like, yeah, you didn't know that, because you didn't see the channel name when you clicked on the video. Seriously, I don't know why I say that every time, other than it's just what you're supposed to say when you start a YouTube video. Just another way the world is a strange place, people. Anyway, we came here to talk about Scotland. So, we left Robert Bruce in a pretty bad spot last time. During the short time in which the crown had rested on his head, 3 of his 4 brothers had been cruelly slain, and his dear wife, sister, and daughter were in the merciless clutches of his foes. And yet, he would go on. Vengeance in the kingdom would be his, and Scotland would be her own nation again. Bruce's army at this time consisted largely of loyal men from his own earldom of Carrick, sturdy warriors of the Hebrides, and a few pockets of knights such as Sir James Douglas and his men. It was a good fighting force, and a fierce one to be sure, but it wasn't enough to match the might of England just yet. Bruce knew that his strength against Longshank's hordes must be in wit, and in the knowledge of his homeland. He must choose his battlefields wisely. The lands about Turnberry were firmly within Scottish control now, along with much loot and plunder from the English. It was to Glen Trool that Bruce turned his eyes next. An unsuspecting English camp in that area was raided and scattered, the survivors running off to bring word to their regional commander, the treacherous Aymer de Valence. De Valence sent his own raiding party and returned to the glen, planning to catch Bruce unawares, just as he had at Methven. But Bruce wasn't about to fall for that same trick twice. Indeed, he was expecting this counterattack, and had made every preparation for it. It was de Valence who would be in for a surprise this time. This is where we see the clever use that Bruce made of the geography of his home country. You see, Glen Trool is a very narrow glen, which glen is just another word for a valley, and is mostly filled up with the little Loch Trool. And loch is just a Scots word for a lake. There is really only one entrance by which heavily clad soldiers might enter this glen, and that is a narrow passage nestled between the 2 hillsides, known to local folk as the Steps of Trool. Thus, in order to get to Bruce, it was this little road that the English must take. So narrow is this way, in fact, that de Valence's men were forced to march along it in single file, one man in front of the other. Suddenly, there was a strange noise in the hills high above their heads. The grinding and sliding of rocks, as if an avalanche were about to begin. And indeed it was, though it was no accident. Bruce's men gave a great shout as they tipped boulders of granite down upon the unsuspecting English. There was nowhere to escape the falling rocks, and many of the soldiers were knocked down or killed before the second plague, a hail of arrows streaking down upon their heads. Confusion and panic spread all up and down the line. They couldn't form up to protect themselves, for the road was so terribly narrow. Bruce, watching from above, knew it was time to strike the final blow. He and his men charged down the steep hillsides, shouting wildly and brandishing their weapons. And that was the end of De Valence's raiding party. This Battle of Glen Trool marked Bruce's first great victory in the Scottish War for Independence. It might be called a small victory, if we are to consider the small amount of men that were engaged in the fighting. But this battle was about more than mere odds and numbers. This victory gave Bruce's followers hope. It showed them that they could indeed defeat the English, and that they did have a chance in this war after all. And it gave them a greater faith in their king and commander, to lead them to ultimate victory. There is a stone today upon that battlefield, called Bruce's Stone, to mark the place where that battle was fought. It was placed there many a year after the death of the king, in order that this victory might be remembered in times to come. An enraged Aymer de Valence sought his foe, determined to crush him and take the crown from his head. Again, Bruce knew that he must choose his field very carefully. His little brave army of 600 could not hope to win in the open field against his enemy's 3,000. Not to mention, most of the Scots were footmen, while the English were primarily mounted fighters. He hurried to Loudon Hill and situated himself upon its peak. One road led up to this hill, and on either side of this lay deep and treacherous bogs, impassable except to those who knew their secrets. This left a narrow front by which the English must attack, and this Bruce and his warriors made even more difficult to traverse by digging 3 great ditches in front of themselves. De Valence did not like the look of what lay before him, but he was haughty, and certainly no coward. He drew his sword and charged with his knights up the hill toward the waiting Scots. You need not guess what happened thereafter. Many a horse fell upon a Scottish spear, and many a rider met his end at the point of his sword. The English cavalry was slowly decimated, for they had no place to spread out and surround their foe, but must only attack at the small places which Bruce had left open. When at last the line of Scottish spearmen gave a shout and made their own offensive down the slopes of Loudon, the English turned and fled, a very haggard De Valence at their head. They galloped off to seek refuge in Bothwell Castle, where they might nurse their wounds in pride. And here's a little map of the 1307 campaign so far, just to give you a bit of an idea of what's happening in terms of geography. It was also about this time that Sir James Douglas first began to make a name for himself. He set off with a troop of his own towards Douglasdale, the lands that had once belonged to his brave father. The castle there was, of course, the primary target, but this was so well fortified that he could not hope to take it in a short time, let alone at all with the little band under his command. Yet Douglas determined to take his revenge for his father's cruel death, and to break the English foothold in his castle. And he cared little for how he did it. On Palm Sunday, when all the English garrison stepped down from the battlements to attend a little church nearby the castle walls, Douglas saw his chance. He and his men fell upon the foreign churchgoers and slew them all. The castle was thereafter burnt to the ground, and as a final deterrent, the wells poisoned and filled with salt. It was a ruthless, rather cruel way to wage war, but it had its effect. Thereafter, all the English knew him as the Black Douglas, and his name alone was enough to incite fear among his foes. And why did Douglas do such damage to his own castle and wells? It might seem strange and even foolish, but we must remember the small amount of men that Douglas had under his command at this time. He didn't have enough soldiers to keep his castle and protect it from another English invasion. His place was to be fighting alongside Bruce to win the rest of the country back. So you see, by destroying the castle and taking away the water source, he sought to prevent the enemy from taking a foothold there again. Bruce did the same with most all of the castles that he took as well. For this was not a war that could afford the tedium of prolonged sieges, but rather a battle of quick wit and well-placed blows.